Night Chill Audiobooks presents Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, written in 1994 by John Berendt. Chapter 6, The Lady of 6,000 Songs. The stream of people going in and out of Joe Odom's house seemed to pick up tempo in the weeks after I met him. That might have been because I had joined the flow myself and was now viewing the phenomenon from midstream, so to speak. I often dropped in after breakfast, by which time the aroma of fresh coffee would be gaining the upper hand over the smell of stale cigarettes from the night before. Joe would be clean-shaven and well-rested on 3 or 4 hours' sleep, and among the assorted company, bartenders, socialites, truck drivers, accountants, there would generally be at least one person who had spent the night on the sofa. Currents of activity swirled about the house even at this early hour. People entered and exited rooms, crisscrossing one's field of vision like characters in La Dolce Vita. One morning, Joe sat at the grand piano in the living room having coffee, playing the piano and talking to me. A fat man and a girl with braided hair walked through, completely engrossed in their own conversation. "She tore up her mother's car yesterday," the girl said. "I thought it was the TV. No, the TV was last week." They continued out into the hall, whereupon a bald man in a business suit poked his head in. "The meeting's at 2, he said to Joe. "I'll call you when it's over. Wish me luck." Then he disappeared. At that point, Mandy came in from the kitchen, wrapped in a white sheet and looking like a voluptuous goddess. She plucked a cigarette from the pack in Joe's shirt pocket, kissed him on the forehead, whispered, "Draw up the damn divorce papers," and then skipped back into the kitchen where Jerry resumed cutting her hair. In the dining room, a young man hooted with laughter as he read Louis Grizzard's column aloud to a white-haired woman who was not finding it at all funny. Overhead, the sound of high-heeled shoes clicked across the floor. "Well, it's 9:30 a.m., said Joe, "and I ain't bored yet." Joe was talking not just to me, but to a person at the other end of the telephone, which was tucked under his chin. Joe often engaged in split conversations of this sort. Sometimes you knew who the other party was, sometimes you did not. "I woke up this morning at 7, he was saying, "and there was the big lump next to me under the covers, which I thought was strange because I had gone to bed alone. Mandy was in Waycross for the night and not due back here for an hour or so, so I lay there just looking at the lump, trying to figure out who or what it was. It was very big, bigger than anybody I knew." "What?" I was sure it was a human being and not a pile of laundry, because it was breathing. Then I noticed something strange about the breathing pattern. It was coming from 2 different parts of the lump. Finally, it dawned on me that the lump was 2 people, which meant I was all man out. So I yanked the covers back, and sure enough, it was a boy and a girl. I had never seen either one of them before. They were both completely naked. Joe paused for a moment to listen to the person at the other end of the telephone. Hey, you know me better than that, Corbett," he said. Then, speaking to both of us again, he continued, "Anyhow, before I had a chance to say anything, the boy asked me, 'Who are you?' Now, I'm pretty sure that's the first time I've ever been asked that question in my own bed. So I said, 'I happen to be the social director here, and I don't believe we met.' I wasn't sure what to do next, but just then the telephone rang, and I learned that I had a busload of tourists coming at noon, 40 people, and that I'd have to make lunch for them because the caterer is sick. Yep, lunch for 40. They're all members of a polka dancing social club from Cleveland." Joe smiled and he listened to the voice on the other end. "Anyhow," he went on, "my 2 newest naked friends got dressed. The boy had tattoos on his arm, a Confederate flag on one arm and a marijuana plant on the other. He put on a really swell t-shirt. It had a "fuck you" printed on it. At the very moment, both he and the girl are in the kitchen helping making shrimp salad for 40 polka dancers. Jerry's in there too, cutting Mandy's hair, and that's why I say I ain't bored yet. Joe said goodbye and hung up the telephone, and as he did, a large blue caftan floated into the room. The caftan was topped by the round, smiling face of a woman about 70. She had powdered white skin set off by bright red lipstick, rouge, and mascara. Her jet black hair was wound into a huge bun that sat on the top of her head like a turban. "I'm off to Statesboro to play for the Kiwanis Club," she said, waving a set of car keys. "And then I have a beauty pageant in Hinesville at 6. I should be back in Savannah by 9. But in case I'm late, can you get to the bar early and cover for me?" "Yes, ma'am," said Joe, and with the woman floated away in a rustle of silk and a jangle of keys. Joe nodded at the spot where she had been standing. "That," he said, "was one of Georgia's greatest ladies, Emma Kelly. Come with us tonight and you'll see her in action. Around these parts she's known as the Lady of 6,000 Songs." For the past 40 years, Emma Kelly had spent the better part of her waking hours driving across the landscape of South Georgia to play piano wherever she was needed. She played at graduations, weddings, reunions, and church socials. All anyone had to do was ask, and she would be there. In Waynesboro, Swainsboro, Ellabelle, Hazelhurst, Newington, Jessup, and Jims. She had played at senior proms for every high school within 100 miles of Savannah. On a given day, she might drive to Meta to play for a ladies' fashion show, then on to Sylvania for a retired teachers' convention, and then to Wren's for a birthday party. Toward evening, she would usually drive to Savannah to play piano at one of our several night spots. But no matter where her engagements took her, she would always be back home in Statesboro an hour west of Savannah to play at the Rotary Club lunch on Monday, the Lions on Tuesday, the Kiwanis on Thursday, and the First Baptist Church on Sunday. Emma played old standards and show tunes, blues, and waltzes. She was a familiar sight with her flowing caftan and happy coat and that towering turban of black hair held in place by 2 lacquered chopsticks. Emma was descended from the earliest English settlers in Georgia and South Carolina. She had met George Kelly when she was 4 and married him when she was 17. He was a sign painter, and by the time he died, Emma had borne 10 children, not counting 5 miscarriages, as she would always say. Being a devout Baptist, Emma never drank. But once, after playing at the Fort Stewart Officers Club, she was stopped on suspicion of drunk driving. The MP who shined his light through the window told her she had been weaving all over the road for the last 3 miles. That was true, but the fact of the matter was that Emma had been trying to undo her corset and slip out of it all that time. She squinted into the glare of the flashlight, clutching her unfastened clothes about her and wondering how on earth was she going to step out of the car in this condition and convince the young man she was sober. It was Emma's good fortune that she had played piano at the MP senior prom years before. He recognized her and knew she never touched a drop, and in that moment she went on her merry way. In fact, most of the highway patrol knew Emma's car, and when it zoomed past them late at night doing 80 or 90, they just generally let it go. Emma had the greatest compassion for the occasional rookie cop who would unknowingly pull her over, siren blaring, blue lights flashing. She would roll down the window and say softly, "You must be new." She'd be thinking ahead to the brown beating the young man was about to receive from the groggy sheriff. It would go something along the lines of, "What in blaze you think you're doing, boy, dragging Emma Kelly off the road? Tell you what you're going to do now. You're going to escort this fine lady all the way to Statesboro. See that she gets home safe. A million pardons, Miss Emma. It won't happen again." In Savannah, Emma's fans followed her from night spot to night spot like a cheerful caravan, from Whispers to Pink House, to the Fountain, to the Live Oak Bowling Alley, to the Quality Inn out by the airport. She was good business. Bar receipts always picked up sharply for the duration of her stay and fell off when it was over. For years, Emma's children had pleaded with her to open her own piano bar and cut down on the driving. After she killed her 9th deer on the highway, they stopped pleading and just plain insisted. "It breaks my heart," said Emma, "because I love animals so much, not to mention the damage it's done to the car." About opening a piano bar, she promised she would think it over. Joe Odom, who had known Emma all his life, often came to hear her wherever she happened to be performing. At some point after his arrival, Emma would play Sentimental Journey, which was the signal for Joe to come up and take over at the piano so she could rest a few minutes. Joe would happily oblige. The night Emma collided with her 10th deer, she drove to Whispers and played Sentimental Journey as soon as Joe set foot in the door. "Go out and see how bad the car is, Joe, will you, honey?" she said. "I can't bear to look at it myself." 6 months later, she and Joe opened a piano bar in an old cotton warehouse overlooking the river. They called it Emma's. Emma's was a long, narrow room, cozy as a book-filled den. Its tiny dance floor was nestled in the curve of a baby grand piano. A picture window looked out on the river, and an occasional containment ship glided by. Dozens of framed photographs of family and friends lined the shelves along one wall, and on the alcove by the entrance was decorated with memorabilia of Johnny Mercer. It was Mercer, in fact, who had nicknamed Emma the Lady of 6,000 Songs. That was how many songs she knew, according to Mercer's calculations. He and Emma had paged through a pile of songbooks, Mercer checking off the songs Emma could sing right away from start to finish. After 3 years of checking off songs, Mercer made an educated guess to the store of lyrics in Emma's head, and he put it at 6,000. The first time I came to Emma's, I was just taking my seat when Emma looked in my direction and asked, "What's your favorite song?" My mind was totally blank, of course, as I looked at her helplessly. A huge freighter came into view over her left shoulder. "Ship," I said. "My ship has sails that are made of silk." "Oh, that's a lovely song," said Emma. "Kurt Weill, 1941. She played it, and from that time on, Emma always played My Ship whenever I came into the bar. "Bartenders know customers by the drinks they order," she said. "I know them by the songs they ask me to play. Whenever regulars walk into the door, I like to play their favorites. It tickles them and makes them feel they're home." Emma had many regulars. There were the 4 laddies from Estill, South Carolina, who drove in several nights a week with or without their husbands. There was the retired bank clerk Abner Croft, who walked his dog every night before going to bed, and more than once kept walking until he got to Emma's, where, dressed in pajamas and a bathrobe, and accompanied by the dog, he was shown to his regular table. Just as he was sitting down, Emma would play Moments Like This, which was his favorite song. There was Wanda Brooks, a self-appointed greeter hostess who wore rakish hats and a rhinestone brooch that advertised her telephone number in glittering numbers an inch high. And Wanda had been a majorette in junior high school. Now she sold tanning beds to suntan parlors in South Carolina and coastal Georgia. She would call out, "Hey!" to perfect strangers, show them to a table, engage them in animated conversation, dance with them, and then move on to chat with others. Wanda was forever for aging in her puss for a lighter, swaying and leaning into a person next to her as she babbled amiably. Inevitably, her ever-present cigarette would tumble from her lips or slip out of her fingers in a shower of glowing ashes, sending the people in her immediate vicinity leaping to their feet and flailing at their clothes. Wanda had platinum blonde hair, and her interest into Emma's was always accompanied by the playing of New York, New York, which was her favorite song. Though Emma was popular night spot, it fell short of expectations in one respect. It failed to keep Emma off the road. She went right on making appearances from one end of South Georgia to the other, and driving on to Savannah afterward to play until early morning. Occasionally she spent the night in Joe Odom's carriage house after closing, but most of the time she found an excuse to drive home to Statesboro. On Saturday night she would drive home no matter what, because her Sundays in Statesboro started very early and ran very late, as I discovered firsthand. Emma invited me to join her one Sunday at church and stay with her throughout the day. This is how it went. Emma pulled into the parking lot of the First Baptist Church in Statesboro Sunday morning at 20 minutes past 8. She was wearing a purple silk dress, a blue cap, turquoise eyeshadow, and a touch of rouge. "Let me see," she said. "We closed Emma's at 3 o'clock last night, and I got home about 4. I would have pulled off the highway and taken a 15-minute nap under the Ash Branch overpass like I usually do, but there was a big old truck there ahead of me, and it took all the room, so I got to bed by 4:30, and then at 7:15, Aunt Annalise called to make sure I got up in time for church." She's 90. Emma adjusted the 2 lacquer chopsticks that anchored her bun. "I can keep going with just a couple of hours sleep, but sometimes you can tell my eyes get puffy." We went inside the church. The preacher delivered a sermon entitled Temptation and Decay from Within. A deacon then read a report on the forthcoming revival week, the theme of which was to be "Wake up, America, God loves you." The deacon thought too many people were still very much asleep in regards to this message. "There are 180 million people in America who do not claim Christ," he said. 2 million in the state of Georgia, thousands in Statesboro alone. The preacher then addressed the gathering. "Have we got any guest among us today, Emma?" Emma whispered that I should stand up. All heads turned. "Well, welcome," the preacher said heartily. "So glad you can join us." After the service, Emma and I walked to a smaller chapel where the older people were to attend their weekly senior assembly. We were slowed a bit by the dozen or so people who came up to welcome me personally to the church and to ask where I was from. "New York," a woman said. "My, I had a cousin who went there once." In the chapel, Emma slipped off her high heels and played the organ as the others came in. Each member of the senior assembly stopped at the organ to greet Emma and then came over to me to say how pleased they were that I had come. Mr. Granger was the first to address the gathering. "I tell you, my wife is doing great," he said. "I knew last Sunday it was malignant, but I couldn't tell you because the doctor had not confirmed it until Tuesday. I really have a heavy heart, but everything is being taken care of as far as I can tell." From the rear of the chapel, a woman said, "Ann McCoy is in St. Joseph's Hospital in Savannah. She's having back problems." Another said, "Sally Powell's sister died." Mr. Granger asked, "Is there anyone else?" "Cliff Bradley," several people said at once. "Cliff went home yesterday afternoon late," said Mr. Granger. "He seems to be doing great." "Goldie Smith needs our prayers," another woman said. "There's something the matter with her stomach. She's been fitted with a prosthesis." A woman with pink lipstick and gold-rimmed glasses stood up to give a testimonial. "Me and my family weren't doing too good until I looked down and saw I had a God hole in my chest." We all have a God hole in our chest. "You should all do what I did. Turn it over to Jesus." When the assembly was over, Emma went to a small room off the chapel where she and a dozen other old women had their Sunday school class. Emma introduced me all over again, and the ladies chirped and mooed little hellos. The leader of the class said she would give a talk about God's people in a changing world, but did anybody have any important announcements first? Myrtle Foster's incision is still draining, said a woman with glasses and a little green suit. I talked to Rap Nelby last night, and they do know when she will be able to come home. We'll have to put her on our prayer list, said the leader. A woman with her hair in rows of small blue-white curls said, Louise saw Mary at the beauty shop on Friday, and it seems the two others are not doing well either, so we need to keep them on the prayer list too. For the next few weeks, the health of several other members of the congregation was discussed, and the prayer list grew by 3 more names. The leader then began her talk. Jesus will never ask you to do anything he wouldn't do himself, said Emma, reaching into her pocketbooks and took out a small manila envelope with Emma Kelly, $24 written across the top. She stood up quietly and put the envelope into a carton with the lady's envelope. Then motioning for me to follow, she tiptoed into the hall with the carton. I felt a tug at my jacket. I hope you enjoyed it. A lady by the door whispered, Come back and see us again. Emma led the way down the hall. Now we go to the little children 2 floors up, she said. First she went around to a windowless room and handed the carton to 2 men who were sitting behind a table piled high with little manila envelopes. Morning, Miss Emma, they said. Upstairs, about 20 children were seated in a semicircle around an upright piano waiting for Emma. She accompanied them as they sang the titles of the books of the New Testament to the tune of Onward Christian Soldiers. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts and the letters to the Romans. Then she played Jesus is a Loving Teacher all the way through twice. We can go now, she said, and we went back down the 2 flights of stairs and out into the parking lot. If the other lady who plays piano can't go to the nursing home, I go there now, said Emma. But she's there today, so instead we drove directly to the Forest Heights Country Club, where Emma went to the buffet, put 2 fried chicken legs on her plate, and sat down at the piano in the dining room. For the next 2.5 hours, she played background music and chatted with the diners who came up one by one or in family groups to greet her and pay their respects. At 2:30, Emma got up from the piano and said her goodbyes. We walked out to the car and drove 50 miles into the bright afternoon sun to Vidalia, home of the sweet Vidalia onion. Emma had been hired to play for a wedding reception at the Serendipity Health and Racket Club. Upon arriving, she went directly to the ladies' room and changed into a flowing black and gold kimono. The owner of the health club, a large lady with a bouffant blonde hairdo, took us on a tour of the spa and showed us the new indoor-outdoor swimming pool and underwater grotto of which she was very proud. The wedding guests began to arrive from the church, but the bride and groom were late. Word had it that they had stopped at a 7-Eleven to get plastic glasses for the champagne they were consuming in the car. When the wedding couple finally arrived, Emma found out that the name of the groom was Bill, and she announced she had a special song for the occasion. She sang, Big Bad Bill is Sweet William now. Married life has changed him. He washes dishes, mops the floor. The song was greeted with laughter and set everybody to dancing, except the little boys who went out and put a bottle of champagne under the hood of the wedding couple's car next to the engine block so it would heat up and explode when they drove away. At 6:30, after Emma had played for 2 hours, we got back into her car for the drive back to Statesboro. If she was tired, she did not show it. She was not only wide awake, but smiling. Someone once wrote that musicians are touched on the shoulder by God. She said, I think it's true. You can make other people happy with music, but you can make yourself happy too. Because of my music, I have never known loneliness and never been depressed. When I was growing up, I used to put the radio under the covers with me at night. That's how I learned so many different songs. In fact, it was because I knew so many songs that I got to know Johnny Mercer in the first place. We met over the telephone 20 years ago. I was playing at a dinner party in Savannah, and a young man kept requesting Johnny Mercer songs. He was kind of surprised when I knew every single one. Then I played some he hadn't heard before, and he was astonished. "I'm Johnny Mercer's nephew," he said. "I want him to meet you. Let's call him now." So he called Bel Air, California, and told Johnny he met this lady who knew every song he'd ever written. Then he put me on the phone. Johnny didn't even say hello. He just said, "Sing the first 8 bars of If You Were Mine." Now that's not a well-known song by Johnny, but it was one that meant a lot to Johnny. I sang it without any hesitation, and we were friends from then on. The sun was beginning to set. "To me, the words are as important as the music," said Emma. "Johnny and I like to compare our favorite phrases. We both love the lyric, 'Too dear to lose, too sweet to last,' from the song While We're Young, and the line from Handful of Stars that goes, 'Oh, what thing unspoken trembled in the air.' Johnny's own lyrics are the best, though. It's hard to think of anything more beautiful than when an early autumn walks the land and chills the breezes and touches with her hand the summer trees. That's poetry. And like painted kites, the days and nights went flying by. The world was new beneath a blue umbrella sky." It was because of Johnny Mercer that Emma started singing. Until she met him, she just played the piano, and that was all. Mercer kept telling her, "Go ahead and sing," but she was afraid. She told him she had no range. "That's all right," he said. "Just sing softly. You don't have to hit every note. Sing low and skip and cheat a lot. If you can't reach it or don't know it, just skip it." He showed her how she could change keys instead of going up an octave for the second verse of I Love Paris. He even helped her cheat with one of his own songs. She was having trouble with the line, "I want to be around to pick up the pieces when somebody breaks your heart." She could not drop down for the second syllable of somebody. Mercer told her to sing the same note for all 3 syllables. She was still dubious about singing, though. Then one evening she started an engagement at the Quality Inn and found a microphone and sound system all set up. "Oh, look," Mercer told her. "You've got a mic. Now you can sing." And she did. Years later, she found out the Mercer had arranged for that mic to be there and paid for it, too. Emma recalled how over the years she had played piano for plain folks and dignitaries, for 3 presidents, 20 governors, and countless mayors. She had jammed with Tommy Dorsey and accompanied Robert Goulet. She recalled the day years ago when playing piano every day of her life had become a necessity. It had happened on a Sunday morning when her youngest son, upset about having broken up with his girlfriend, dropped Emma and her husband at church, and then drove into the woods, set a rifle butt against the floorboards, turned the barrel to his chest, and fired. He collapsed on the steering wheel, sounding the horn. Someone heard the horn and came a-running. The boy lost a lung, but his life was saved at a cost of $40,000. Emma had to work day and night to pay the bills. The near tragedy only served to intensify her faith. What if the bullet had gone just a fraction of an inch to the left or right? What if he had not fallen on the steering wheel? The Lord must have been with him, Emma said. I have to go on believing for the reason alone. Even after she had paid the hospital bills, Emma continued her nightly appearances. It had become her life. We arrived back in Statesboro shortly after 7:30. Before going home, Emma stopped at the home of her 90-year-old aunt to bring her a box of food she had taken with her from the country club. Her aunt came to the door in her nightgown and nightcap. She'd been listening to the radio broadcast of the evening sermon at the Baptist church. Emma went inside for a few moments and tucked her in bed. Then, more than 12 hours after her day had begun, she drove home. There's another wonderful thing about being able to play music, she said. It's something Johnny Mercer told me. He said, when you play songs, you can bring back people's memories of when they fell in love. That's where the power lies. On the basis of attendance alone, Emma's piano bar was an unqualified success. Financially, however, the bar did not do very well. Joe's inclination to give people free drinks was one reason. In addition to that, many of Joe's old creditors saw the bar as a chance to recoup some of the money he owed them. They would come in for an hour or so of drinking and then leave without paying. But even so, Emma should have made more money than it did. Joe sought the advice of Darlene Poole, who knew the bar business inside and out. Darlene had worked as a barmaid in a number of local saloons and was engaged to the owner of a successful club on the south side. She and Joe sat at a table having a drink. "You got a nice setup here," she said. "The Blue Rinse and Foxtrot crowd finally have a place to go. Can't hardly go to the night flight. Can't go to Malone's. Can't go to Studebaker's. You got 'em all to yourself, honey. Nice going. Plus, I see you've got Wanda Brooke coming in here. Broads like Wanda are what I call insurance, with her bumping into everybody and knocking drinks over left and right at $3 a shot. You can't help but make it work. Now, if you can just keep the freeloaders out and stop giving away the liquor, you should do all right. Just make sure nobody's glass stays empty too long." "Maybe that's the problem," said Joe. "Gotta get Moon to pour drinks faster." "Moon?" Darlene whirled around and looked toward the bar. Then she looked back at Joe. "Shit, Joe, you didn't tell me you had Moon Tompkins tending bar." Darlene leaned closer to the Joe and lowered her voice. "Moon's your problem, honey." "Well, what do you say to that?" Joe asked. "He seems okay to me, maybe a little slow." "Moon Tompkins has done 3 years for bank robbery," said Darlene. Joe laughed. Yeah, he said, "and it wasn't just one bank either, it was 2. "You're serious, aren't you?" said Joe. His laugh turned into a curious smile. He looked toward the bar where Moon Tompkins was pouring vodka into a row of 4 tall glasses. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "I wouldn't have thought old Moon had it in him." "How in the hell did you ever let him here become a bartender?" Darlene asked. "Emma hired him. I guess he didn't put the bank job on his resume." Darlene lit a cigarette. "I suppose you heard about the armed robbery at Green Parrot Restaurant last week?" "Uh-huh. Moon did it." "Oh, come on," said Joe. "Are you sure about that?" "Positive." "But wait a minute," said Joe. "How could you know it was Moon? They haven't caught the robber yet." "I know," said Darlene. "I drove the getaway car." Joe had nothing against convicted bank robbers or getaway drivers either, but he felt foolish in trusting his cash register to a dedicated thief. Moon was using the most rudimentary of all scams, making more drinks than he rang up, and when he did ring up drinks, he often propped the check on the cash register so it hid the numbers. "You can bet he's pushing the no sale button whenever he does that," said Darlene, "and slipping $20 into his pocket." Joe decided that the wisest thing to do would be to catch Moon in the act, confront him quietly, and allow him to quit without a fuss. He would not tell Emma anything about it because the idea that she had been in business with a bank robber might give her a heart attack. Joe asked 2 friends to come to the bar the following night and keep careful count of all the drinks Moon served. During the day, however, word leaked out that night that Moon Tompkins would be caught with his hands in the till at Emma's, and by the time the bar opened, a festive crowd was clamoring to get in and watch the sting unfold, as if it were a sporting event. "Good gracious, we're having a lively night," said Emma. Customers ordered drinks at a furious rate, hoping to encourage Moon to steal more than he had ever stolen before. The more drinks they ordered, the merrier the mood became, and by midnight it seemed that Emma and Moon were the only people in the bar who were unaware of the sting in progress. The customers called out their orders. "Hey, Moon, give me a stinger, ha-ha." What better drink for a sting than a stinger? "I'll have a Rob Roy, Moon." A half hour before closing, Moon took the trash barrel out to empty it in a dumpster and never came back. When Joe stepped behind the bar and opened the cash drawer, it was empty. Moon had cleaned it out. Moon's disappearance did nothing to damp her spirits at Emma's. It only served to heighten the level of hilarity. At closing time, there was nothing Joe could do but tell Emma what had happened, that Moon had taken all the money and run. "My goodness me," said Emma. "Did he really?" "I'm afraid so," said Joe, "and I guess it's a good thing we're rid of him, because it seems he'd done this kind of thing before. He's a bank robber." "Oh, I know all about that," said Emma. "You knew?" "Why, of course," she said. "Moon told me about it when he first came looking for a job. He didn't try to hide it, and I told him I admired him for that. I thought he deserved a second chance in life. I think everybody does, don't you?" "Well, yes, ma'am," said Joe. Emma got into her car and then pulled out onto Bay Street, headed for Statesboro. And was his customer at this hour of the morning, Joe led a few friends back to his house, where, according to the fire captain's report later in the day, someone dropped a lighted cigarette into a wastebasket shortly before dawn and caused the house that nearly gutted the house. There was a big fire. Joe was the first to smell the smoke. He ran through the house, rousing people from bed and sofas and herding them into the street. "Is everyone out?" the fire captain asked. "Everyone I know about," said Joe. "You mean there might be people in your house you don't know about?" "Captain," said Joe, "there have been times when there were people in my bed I didn't know about." It was widely assumed that Joe Odom had set his house on fire to collect the insurance money, even though he no longer owned the house. Joe's landlord asked him to vacate the premises at once, not so much because of the fire, but because Joe had never paid them any rent. A week later, Joe took what furnishings he could salvage and moved into a large federal-style brick townhouse at 101 East Oglethorpe Avenue, a few blocks away. His new next-door neighbors were Mr. and Mrs. Malcolm Bell. Mr. Bell was the retired chairman of the Savannah Bank, former president of the venerable Oglethorpe Club, and a respected historian. Mrs. Bell was an intellectual and a member of a distinguished Savannah family. In view of his august new neighbors, Joe's friends anticipated that life at his new home might perforce be a bit more modulated than that he had been when he was at 16 East Jones Street. And perhaps it was, but before long, neighbors began to notice that visitors were passing through the unlocked front door of 101 East Oglethorpe Avenue in a steady stream, that tour buses were pulling up in front at noontime, and that pleasant piano melodies could be heard spilling out of the house, day or night, but especially at times when the city was otherwise utterly still.